Good afternoon. Sorry for the delay there. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar. Today's talk and panel are part of the Make It Happen in the Philippines business dialogue organized by the various Philippine trade and investment centers and their offices in the US and the Philippine Board of Investments. My name is Graham Payne, your moderator for today. I'm a certified strategic sourcing professional through the Procurement and Supply Institute of Asia. I spent a number of years working in Silicon Valley as well as in high-tech Philippines. Today's webinar is entitled Asia Outsourcing Insights, Top Reasons to Move Your Electronics Outsourcing Business to the Philippines. Our featured speaker today is Mr. Jay Chavez of Ionix EMS. Ionix has been building high-tech electronics products since the 1970s when it began supporting the requirements of US-based firms such as Intel and TI by providing semiconductor assembly, packaging, and test services. By the 1980s, Ionix was building board-level electronics assemblies, including subsystems and box-build products for firms such as IBM and NEC and other global OEMs, and continuing to this day. Over the years, Ionix has shipped high-tech products to customers in over 160 countries. Following our presentations, we've planned a panel discussion with Jay and the representatives of the Philippine Trade and Investment Centers in the US. Please feel free to submit questions anytime during the presentations using your Q&A box on the bottom right corner of the screen. To officially begin our program, we have a recorded message from DTI Undersecretary Dr. Rafaelita Aldaba. Celine?
Good morning from the Philippines and a pleasant evening to our audience from the US. The Department of Trade and Industry, represented by the Philippine Trade and Investment Centers in Washington, D.C., New York, Los Angeles, and Silicon Valley, together with the Board of Investments, started the Make It Happen in the Philippines virtual dialogue series in 2020 at the onset of COVID-19. This aimed to continue engagement with our US stakeholders and serve as a platform to provide updates on the Philippines' actions to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 on global businesses. We had our inaugural program with Ionix featuring smart manufacturing. Since then, we have featured RF microwave manufacturing, supply chain in Asia, healthcare information system, and recently we held the Philippines-US Business Dialogue with the US Department of Commerce and CEOs of top businesses from the US and the Philippines, such as ON Semiconductor, Concentrix, Jollibee, and San Miguel Corporation. I am glad that we continue to have this conversation. Let me first update you on the current Philippine business climate. Our COVID-19 vaccination is on track to vaccinate 80% of the population this year. A total of 52.8 million doses arrived in the country earlier this month. Just last Sunday, another 5 million doses arrived in the country. The national government continues to commit the gradual and safe reopening of the economy, as evidenced by the reclassification of the plus areas, Bulacan, Cavite, Laguna, and Rizal, to modified enhanced community quarantine, and the pilot implementation of the alert level system in the National Capital Region. This allows, once again, more industries to reopen and more employees to resume work. We are strongly optimistic of a post-pandemic recovery as the fundamental structure and strength of our economy remains intact. For the second quarter of 2021, the Philippine economic growth accelerated to 11.8% compared to minus 17% in the same quarter in 2020. This is the highest GDP growth recorded since the fourth quarter of 1988. Despite the disruptions brought about by COVID-19, the Philippine Central Bank reported a 37.8% increase in foreign direct investments in the country from January to May of this year, compared with the same period last year. The Philippines is also experiencing strong manufacturing and services growth in the last 10 years. For quarter 2, 2021, manufacturing growth is at 22.3%. The country's manufacturing output has rebounded, pointing towards industry stabilization, with recorded value production index of 439.6 for June 2021, compared to negative 81.7 in June 2020. Latest employment data also showed that unemployment in the country declined from 7.7% in June to 6.9% in July. In addition, the Philippine Purchasing Managers Index, or PMI, for July was above the neutral 50 mark at 50.4. We attribute such resilience and success to one of our key advantages: our people. We have 45 million highly skilled and educated, dedicated, and cost-efficient workforce with very low turnover rate. Our young and dynamic population not only boosts our domestic consumption and local demand, but also continues to use innovation as an engine for growth. In 2021, the Philippines placed 51st out of 131 countries in the Global Innovation Index. We also have access to key markets through our bilateral and regional free trade agreements with Japan, with the European Free Trade Association covering Switzerland, Iceland, Norway, and Liechtenstein, ASEAN and ASEAN's FTA partners, including China, Australia, and New Zealand, India, South Korea, and Japan. The Philippines is also a recipient of the Generalized System of Preferences, representing tariff privileges with countries such as the US, Canada, the EU, UK, and Russia. We are accelerating our discussions with India to commence negotiations on a preferential trade agreement. This is particularly important as India is currently not a member of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP, agreement. This presents vast opportunities to lay foundations for American businesses' expansion and diversification plans into the region. The Philippines certainly fits the bill as your next complementary investment destination, since we provide preferential trade agreements with global strategic markets. Being part of the support industries for global manufacturing, the Philippine semiconductor and electronics industry remains the top contributor to the country's economy. The industry is characteristically made up of export-oriented firms, accounting for about 62% of Philippine total exports last year at $43 billion. It was also the third largest contributor to our manufacturing gross value added. The Philippine electronics industry is currently home to about 500 semiconductor and electronics companies and is a successful hub for semiconductor manufacturing services and electronics manufacturing services. We are an emerging player in integrated circuit design with a growing base of competitive IC design companies. The pandemic has led to the fast development of the Philippine medical devices industry. Let me conclude by saying that the United States and the Philippines have the longest standing relationship in the region. The US is among our top investors, and on top of our robust economic relationship, we continue to explore potential collaboration areas such as sustainable development, renewable energy, and education. we are working with our government and the private sector partners in the US to sustain economic growth and address the slowdown caused by the pandemic. President Biden himself said that a major economy like the US cannot deal with a crisis of this magnitude alone, and that it would need to work in concert with like-minded allies. I am grateful that you are all here today to consider establishing a partnership with us. I again invite all of you to expand and further diversify your business in the Philippines. Together, let's make it happen in the Philippines.
A special thanks to Dr. Aldaba for her contribution here. Our next speaker is Mr. Jay Chavez, COO of Ionics. Jay is the Senior Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of Ionics. He's worked in the electronics manufacturing industry for over 25 years. He also had the opportunity to represent the Philippines as a speaker at the World Trade Organization, reporting on non-tariff barriers to trade and their impact on Philippine companies. Jay is a strong advocate of Industry 4.0, IoT, and smart manufacturing implementation, and has shared his insights and experiences related to these subjects in numerous speaking engagements. Please welcome Mr. Jay Chavez.
Hello, everybody. So let me share my screen. Okay, hello, everyone. Thank you for attending our session today. Today, I'll be sharing with you some insights on Asia outsourcing and the top reasons why you should be moving your electronics manufacturing to the Philippines. To start off, one of the main reasons you should be manufacturing in the Philippines is advanced manufacturing. You see, the semiconductor and electronics industry, as Graham mentioned earlier, started back in the 70s. Ionics itself was founded in 1974, and we're one of the oldest and most experienced EMS companies in the country. Today, as Yusek Fita told us that there are many semiconductor companies with assembly and test facilities in the Philippines. These companies include onsemi, NXP, ST Micro, TI, Microchip, and many others. On the electronics side, we have a lot of OEMs like Panasonic, Epson, Toshiba. We have Sanyo. We have Dyson produces a lot in the Philippines. Canon and Brother and many others as well. So all throughout these years, there have been trend in automation in the industry. So we're not just labor anymore in the Philippines. Companies have been investing in a lot in terms of automated equipment and automated test equipment, automated assembly equipment. So Ionics, for example, our strategy is always to keep up with the latest manufacturing capabilities. In fact, we have many advanced manufacturing capabilities like multi-chip modules. We have flip chip assembly, CSP, package on package. We have selective soldering, vacuum reflow. We use 3D X-ray, not just 2D X-ray. We use 3D AOI and all of the advanced equipment and technology used for electronics manufacturing. Also, on top of that, back in 2015, Ionics launched our Industry 4.0 strategy. So on top of automation, we have also focused on connectivity and intelligence in the production line. We connected all the machines, we implemented analytics, we implemented the AI, and we have established a digital twin of the factory. And all of this is really to ensure that we're always ahead in terms of the manufacturing technology area. Aside from that, we see that as far as product capability is concerned, there's a wide range of products produced in the Philippines. And we're not talking about just simple electronic products. We see very advanced products from different industries. For example, for Ionics, we produce medical devices like telehealth diagnostic products. Automotive, we produce dashboards, infotainment systems, security systems. For telecom, we produce backhaul equipment, 4G. Now we're transitioning to 5G equipment, CPEs, wireless, fiber, networking equipment. Um, Also, of course, there's consumer like home automation products, projectors, and also computer peripherals like printers, HDD, SDD, tablets, and a lot more. So a lot of electronic products are being produced in the Philippines, and these are not just simple. Actually, the more complicated the product, the better it is for us. Um, This is just a picture of our production line. So this is a typical SMT production line with all the equipment connected to our in-house enterprise system. This is our digital twin. So we have connected our lines to our enterprise system, and we have actually developed a digital twin of our factories. The digital twin, you can see what's happening in the line real time. You can see the hourly output. You can see efficiency, the downtime history. You can really drill down to specific machines and see what the repair history is. You can see what spare parts were replaced and what is the capacity. A lot of different data you can drill down, and you can see just from anywhere in the world. You can access it, so you can know what's happening real time in the factory. So we also established a data science section where all the data is analyzed. We implement analytics, we implement deep learning to make sure that we have data models to detect anomalies that's happening in the line. We also use it for rapid root cause identification. And all of this is really implemented in not just in Ionics, but a lot of companies in the Philippines are starting to go into the Industry 4.0 trend. So aside from manufacturing capability, quality is one of the most important reasons why you should move your manufacturing to the Philippines as well. Philippine companies value quality above all. There are a lot of Japanese companies in the Philippines, and the Philippine companies learned a lot from them. Ionics definitely learned a lot of our manufacturing know-how from our Japanese customers back in the 80s. And that is the reason why we have imbibed a culture of quality. Most Philippine companies have certifications to quality management systems like ISO 9000, but a lot of them have multiple certifications like 13485 for medical devices, IATF 16949 or VDA 6.1 for automotive, TL 9000 for telecommunications, AS 9100 for aviation, space, and defense, and of course 14001 for environmental. Aside from management system certifications, there are also certifications, product certifications, and other certifications like IPC, UL, CCC, FDA, and many others. For example, for medical devices, Ionics is a US FDA registered manufacturer. So these are just one of the things that just shows you that Philippine companies and Ionics in particular are really focused on quality. So aside from manufacturing capability and quality, we have to look at cost. Another real important reason to move to the Philippines is cost. You can see here that the cost for labor and then the talent pool is pretty competitive. This slide shows you where we are in terms of either direct labor or indirect labor salary. So you can see here from this chart, from Australia all the way to Bangladesh, we're really very competitive. We have here Australia, South Korea, Hong Kong, Taiwan, China, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, India, and we're here right beside Vietnam in terms of manufacturing worker salary. From the engineering side, for the engineering support, it's the same. It's the same story. The Philippines labor engineering cost is very, very low, and it's very competitive compared to the rest of the ASEAN or even Asian countries. And then aside from just the cost of labor, you have to look at productivity as well. This slide shows us that there was a study by McKinsey that comparing the cost of labor and combining that with productivity, we see here that the Philippines is fairly competitive. So you're not just paying cheaper labor, but you're also getting more productivity out of what you pay. So this is a very interesting reason, another good reason to look at the Philippines. So how is this possible? It's all possible because of our workforce. You see, the Philippines has 110 million population, and we're actually the 13th largest population in the world. And aside from that, the median age is just 24. So it's a fairly large population, fairly young population. So that really positions the Philippines as a good place for manufacturing. Philippines is poised to be a manufacturing powerhouse in the next few years, in the next decades to come. It's not just a large population, but we also have highly skilled labor. Our educational system is based on the US educational system. We have long experience in semiconductor and electronics since the 70s, and we have very ample engineering support. As you can see here in this chart, the Philippines is the youngest median age, has the lowest median age in the ASEAN countries, and it really supports manufacturing. As far as talent availability is concerned, the Philippines produces 170 STEM graduates every year. So this includes engineering and technology, IT-related courses, sciences, and math. And comparing that with the rest of ASEAN, in terms of tertiary education, the Philippines is second to Indonesia with more than 703,000 tertiary graduates every year. Another reason to move to the Philippines is communication. You know, English is widely spoken in the Philippines. You can go to the street, you can talk to any vendor, you can talk to kids, you can communicate with them in English. You won't get lost, and it's very important in business because, as of course, as we all know, English is the main language for business globally, and the Philippines has always been very good in English because it is the official language of education from kinder to college, and this facilitates good commercial discussions, and it reduces the overall cost of doing business. You see, communicating in English is, it's good from the day-to-day business operations, but the real value of English communication is when there are problems. So when you find the problem, you need to find the root cause immediately. You should be able to talk to the engineer in the line. You have to be able to talk to the supervisor in the line directly without the use of interpreters. When it's time sensitive, for example, you have an engineering change that you have to communicate to the whole organization. So English really facilitates all of that. So the value of English cannot be uh, emphasized. So for example, if you're auditing the line, you don't need an interpreter. You can go to talk to the operator directly and ask the operators questions, and she will be able to converse with you in English. In fact, all our work instructions are in English. So there's really no need to translate. And as you know, translation brings a lot of problems with it. So there's no need to translate special instructions. Everything is done in English. Another good reason to consider the Philippines is IP protection. IP protection is a big deal in the Philippines. Basically, we adhere to the Paris Convention, to the Berne Convention, the Patent Cooperation Treaty. We also have the Republic Act 8942 for Intellectual Property Code of the Philippines, and it really is being implemented, and there is a lot of emphasis in Philippine companies to protect IP. Also, it's noteworthy that the Philippines is not included in the U.S. Trade Representative Special 301 watch list. So the watch list actually identifies countries, red flags countries where IP protection is not adhered to, and the Philippines is definitely not part of that list. On the environmental, social, and governance perspective, the Philippines being a tropical country with a lot of natural resources, a lot of great beaches, we actually promote environmental protection, and it's also true with the companies in the manufacturing sector. A lot of companies are ISO 14001 certified, of course, Ionics included. We also adhere to green procurement. We are certified by customers for green procurement. From the social point of view, we adhere to occupational health and safety standards. The Philippines is an ILO member, so you won't be able to see any child labor or prison labor in any company in the Philippines. And most companies, I would say most companies would focus on good governance and corporate social responsibility, especially for Ionics because we are publicly listed. So the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, really monitors publicly listed companies very closely. We have our annual sustainability reports to show our corporate social responsibility activities, our environmental activities, and our outreach programs as well. Now, there has been in the supply chain scene, there has been a trend in recently to decentralize the supply chain, especially during the pandemic when we see that the global supply chain really was turned on its head. So now people are now looking for alternative manufacturing locations, and the Philippines is really a viable alternative for for the established countries like China, simply because Philippine companies are very flexible in terms of providing services to customers. And we also provide a full transparency and visibility in the supply chain. Philippine companies adhere very seriously to qualified sources or to your AVL. We won't put in parts that are not qualified. We provide open books, so you know what parts we put in the BOM. We provide complete visibility across the supply chain. Infrastructure-wise, the Philippines is really has been doing a lot in terms of infrastructure. We have advanced telecom and datacom infrastructure owing to our BPO sector. The Philippines is number one in the BPO industry. And with that, we have really upgraded our telecom and datacom infrastructure. We have a robust logistics industry. Of course, we have the forwarders, all the global forwarders, all the global couriers are in the Philippines. We have a very good logistics flow in terms of being able to import very freely. A lot of the electronics companies are in the economic zones and they are duty free, and they have we have what we call a green lane in terms of importation and exportation. So it's very quick for us to be able to import from other countries. If you have a container coming in within 24 hours, it's released by customs. If it is by air, within a few hours of the plane arriving in the airport, it's the parts are already in your factory. And export-wise, it's very quick. Customs has made it very easy for electronics companies to do importation and exportation. As far as other infrastructure is concerned, the current Philippine government has been focusing on building roads, bridges, rails, airports, and seaports. They call it the Build, Build, Build program, where 7% of the GDP is actually provided for infrastructure. And here's another good reason why you should consider the Philippines for your electronics manufacturing. Simply because we have very good relations with the US. We just celebrated our 75 years of Philippine and US relationship. The Philippines is a key ally in the Pacific. We have a mutual defense treaty. The Philippines is also a strong democracy. In fact, our system is patterned after the US Constitution. We're very westernized, we're very American in our orientation. So international buyers will really feel safe to be producing in the Philippines. And then after that, we also have, let's talk about tariffs and trade agreements. Basically, the Philippines is a active member of the World Trade Organization. We are a signatory to the WTO Information Technology Agreement. We are also, as mentioned earlier by Yusek Fita, we are a beneficiary of the GSP program of the United States. And this all means that we enjoy tariff, either duty-free or reduced tariffs when you import from the Philippines. And we cannot emphasize this enough, of course, comparing that with other countries where there is a lot of tariffs put onto the products. In the Philippines, you can enjoy not just GSP, but really reduced tariffs from basically either the ITA agreement or the GSP program. So the Philippines is part of ASEAN. ASEAN is a group of 10 countries, and it's actually the third largest population in the world. It's the fifth largest economy. It has 700 million population, and actually the Philippines is positioned as a gateway to the Asian region. Let me show you this slide, and this slide shows us that the Philippines is really in the middle of all the electronics, Asian electronics world. As you can see here, the Philippines is within 2 to 4 hours of major Asian countries. We're 4 hours from Tokyo. We're 3 hours from Singapore. We're 2 hours from Hong Kong. So this really shows that we are positioned very well in terms of geography. And you can see here that the Philippines is your gateway to ASEAN. So in summary, basically, these are really the top reasons why you should be considering the Philippines for your electronics manufacturing. We have very good advanced manufacturing capability. We have very good focus on quality. We are very competitive in cost. Talent is available. We have good English communication. We protect your IP. We're big on environmental, social, and governance. We have a very, very flexible supply chain that provides complete visibility and traceability and transparency. Our infrastructure has been is getting better and better every year. We have very good relations with the US. We're a strong ally of the US, and you can really leverage on tariff based on tariff and trade agreements. And we're the gateway to ASEAN. So with this, we encourage everybody to look at the Philippines, consider the Philippines as your manufacturing location. And of course, Ionics is here. We can guide you through the process. We can consult with you. If you have pain points, we can actually give you our insights, our experience in manufacturing or outsourcing in Asia. We can help you in any way we can. With that, thank you very much. Back to you, Graham.
Okay, thank you, Jay. An outstanding presentation, and greatly appreciate you sharing that information about Ionics, truly a top-tier EMS firm. I'm not sure, do we have a video that we plan to play? That's on my agenda here. I'm not sure, but I'll tell you what, let's move forward. We'd like to proceed now to the panel discussion and question and answer session. Joining us for this Q&A session will be Jay and the representatives of the Philippine Trade and Investment Centers in the US. And I'd like to introduce them to you. They include Special Trade Representative Raymond Batak, Washington, D.C., the Philippine Embassy in Washington, D.C. Special Trade Representative Kenneth Yap, also in Washington, D.C. Trade Commissioner Benedict Uy, New York City. Trade Commissioner Eric Elnar, Philippine Consulate in Los Angeles. And the Trade Commissioner of Silicon Valley and San Francisco, Céline Layug. All right, to begin, we've prepared several questions for our panelists. And however, we do hope to segue to the questions from the audience, and we hope we have some questions from the audience. And we're very interested in what questions you may have. But I'll begin with a prepared question here. And this question has to do with the pandemic and how the Philippines has addressed this problem. We're now more than a year into the pandemic. From the electronics industry perspective, we'd like to know how the industry has adjusted to the measures that were put in place to control the spread of COVID in the Philippines. And I'm throwing this up for anybody on the panel who would like to try to address that question.
Okay, Graham.
Yes.
Yeah, actually, since last year when the pandemic hit us, immediately Philippine companies implemented the health protocols, of course, distancing. The problem with production, of course, with the production line, we had to put up barriers between the operators. We also implemented the strict quarantine if there are any symptoms with the employees. Ionics actually we gave each employee a thermometer so they would check their temperature before they leave the house, before they go on the bus, and before they enter our companies. and we make sure that there's nobody going in with fever or any symptoms. We gave them all masks and face shields. We did a lot of testing. We quarantine people as necessary. We are very strict on this. And of course, when the vaccines came, we started vaccinating our employees. Right now, we're over 40% vaccinated. We're ahead of the country average, actually. And um, what I can say, definitely it was very hard. It was very hard. Putting people in quarantine, actually, of course, that puts a lot of strain on production. It was very hard, but I believe that we adopted pretty well. We adopted pretty fast, actually. We're actually in full production. Of course, we have to compensate with more employees because there are always people in quarantine, not necessarily because they have COVID, just because they are close contacts or because they have symptoms. We quarantine them. So what we do is we've added people to compensate for people in quarantine, and it allowed us to still produce at our rated capacity. And I guess Philippine and it's the same with all the other electronics companies in the Philippines. We have actually adapted very well.
Very good. I'll go to another question here that I have with regards to the current allocation of semiconductors. What strategy is Ionix utilizing in terms of working with suppliers and perhaps customers to mitigate the impact of the shortages?
Wow. Actually, that's a tough question.
Yeah.
Nobody is insulated with this chip shortage. All companies we've seen, big companies, small companies, everybody's really affected, and it's a strange world that we live in right now with COVID and the chip shortage. That's what I can say. But in order to be able to continue, what we've done is really, anyway, we've always maintained good relations with component suppliers and distributors, and that I think is very key now. You can't be a spot buyer. Of course, you have to look for sources, right, and buy immediately when you find the stock. But then relationships with suppliers, relationships with distributors, relationship with the chip manufacturers themselves. These are the things that we have really focused on, and it has helped us to expedite deliveries, to get allocation. Also, another thing that we did was to ask our customers to order at the very least until the middle of next year, because lead times are stretching. We now see lead times of over a year for components, and the only way to be able to deliver product is to really order ahead. So we've asked customers to order until the minimum until middle of next year. We also have even customers ordering for the whole of 2022. Aside from that, of course, looking at the open market, it's automatic. We have a design team, therefore we know we've searched alternative components for our customers. We've worked with our customers to find alternative components, alternative brands. And in fact, there's one customer who has a lot of inventory of their legacy products. They have a huge demand for their newer products, but they don't have the main chip because it's on allocation. The lead time is more than a year. So what they asked us to do was to actually salvage the part from their legacy products, reball them, and then mount them on the new products. So we did this for them because we wanted to support them, of course. And it turned out that the yield is pretty high. We got a yield of over 98%. They were very happy. They were able to, they took the risk, and they were actually very happy with the result. They were able to continue to support their customers, and just shows you the lengths to which we would go just to support our customers and just to find solutions for this shortage.
Well, I'm certainly impressed by the 98% yield. Whenever you get into rework of that nature, you're right. The yield tends to take a dip. So that's a testimony to the quality that Ionics can produce. All right, I'm going to go to another question here. As a purchasing manager, or former purchasing manager, I've surveyed many EMS firms and qualified a few. One question I always like to ask EMS firms that I'm talking to is relates to process. For instance, a sales order entry process. So when I give you an order, exactly what happens to that? Can you summarize the sales order entry process there at Ionics?
Okay, so first of all, definitely before we receive any order, all the commercial and all the technical things should have been sorted out. We would have the BOM in our ERP system already. So once we receive an order, the first thing we do is actually confirm the order. We have to confirm the order. We immediately give a delivery date based on lead time. And then we input the order in our system. We run MRP. We grind out all the purchase orders, release that to suppliers within the same week that we receive the orders. And from there on, we track all the promised dates of the materials. We put that into the system as well. We come up with the material status reports, and we share that with our customers. So key is actually visibility. Customers would always want to know what's happening with their orders, so we provide them visibility in terms of providing them the material status reports, when the product will be buildable. Once it's buildable, once it's in production, we provide customers visibility of the work in process and what the yields are. We provide yield reports, either daily, weekly, or monthly, depending on what the customer prefers. And it's all the full actually visibility is from order receipt all until production and delivery.
Okay, very good. I appreciate that response, Jay. Thank you. Another question here. My company has end customers in the Asean economic region, and from time to time we need to return boards, subassemblies, perhaps subsystems for evaluation, test, and repair. It's certainly a lot more convenient for us to do that in that region rather than to ship those items back to the US or the originator. How are you set up to process reverse logistics activities there at Ionics?
Well, that's actually a good question. We have several customers who use us as their global repair or refurbishment hub. So we actually do that. We receive their RMAs from all over the world. We repair them and we send them back. We have specialized lines just to do that. We have specialized people with advanced troubleshooting skills. We have dedicated testers for them, and we have service level agreements with them to be able to ship back at a certain time frame. So the agreements could be a week or 2 weeks from receipt to ship back. We do that for telecom products. We do that for, we have a customer who does servers for banks, actually, of all things. So it's very sensitive in terms of data privacy, data protection. We also do that for, practically we do that for a lot of our customers. And we even do that for companies where we did not manufacture the products themselves. So we just do it as a repair center for them.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to get a foot in the door with a new customer, is to handle
That's right.
that sort of activity. So that's an excellent point. All right, I have another question. Jay, we'll give you a breather for a moment here. And I have a question for Ken in regards to your recent post in Tokyo, Japan. What can U.S. stakeholders draw from the strong Philippine-Japanese high-tech relationship? Why do Japanese firms seem to prefer working with the Philippines?
Thank you for the question, Graham, and congratulations, Jay, for a very, very thorough presentation. So the Philippines actually is already a manufacturing center for Japanese companies in the automotive and the electronics industries. So as Jay mentioned earlier, we have Toshiba, Nidec Corporation, making hard disk drives. We have printer makers, Canon, Brother, and Seiko Epson, all with substantial manufacturing in the Philippines. We also have automotive wire harness companies like Sumitomo Wiring Systems, Yazaki Torres, Furukawa Electric, Yokowo Company, and they manufacture wire harnesses for cars, and now especially for electric vehicles, and they export all of these parts to excuse me, to the United States. And electronics companies making semiconductors and consumer electronics such as ROM, Ibiden, and Minebea Mitsumi are also undertaking expansion in the Philippines even during the pandemic. And so I suppose, and we are glad that the Japanese are very happy with our workers and the availability of skilled labor in the country. And one thing that is driving the expansion of Japanese companies in the Philippines is the thrust of the Japanese government in encouraging investments, Japanese investments in the Asean region, in the Philippines included, in order to make their supply chain more resilient. They have experienced a lot of difficulty during the pandemic when most of the source of raw materials and components come from limited countries, and when the pandemic hit, there were shortages of not only electronic products but also even medical supplies and personal protective equipment, even in Japan. So basically, that is what's driving the Japanese to expand in the Philippines, is the skilled labor. It's the mandate of the Japan government in making their supply chain more resilient. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Ken. Based on my own experience, we find that the Japanese companies like to manage the supply chain rather than to hand it off to our companies in the Philippines. And what do we need to do to convince them that we can handle their materials planning and purchasing?
We are very glad that we have workers who have experience working in high-tech companies, especially electronic companies. I was also posted in Taiwan, and when you talk of high-tech, you're talking of the SMC, UMC, and most of the engineers in those companies are Filipinos. And when I was there in Taiwan in the late 90s, we had already about 60,000 Filipinos working in those factories with experience. And one thing that the Taiwanese were complaining at that time was that our workers were only allowed to stay for, I think, 2 to 3 years, and they have to go home. And they can't go back to Taiwan. And, that's a big issue for the Taiwanese when they have already, invested in training in these with these workers. So what I want to say is that we have engineers capable of handling very expensive equipment, and they're very capable. And we have people who are used to working for multinational companies, electronics companies in Taiwan, Korea, and in Japan, who have the skill set and who require very minimal training to do the job. And so, there is potential for the American companies to do outsourcing. Indeed, it makes sense because America also, the thrust of the American government is also to strengthen their own supply chain. And we are offering the services of Filipino companies like Ionics, and there are others as well.
Well, thank you very much, Ken. And I appreciate you responding to that question. That's another tough question. And thank you very much for that. And I have one more question here, and then we will go to another brief video before we conclude this webinar. And I'm going to throw out this last question to the panel. Americans think of Asia as high volume production, not necessarily new product introduction or prototypes that characterize startup companies. How can we encourage startup firms to take a look at our capabilities in the Philippines? And why would it make sense for us to address startup requirements? The startup requirements, of course, are low volume prototyping type work, and that precedes going into volume production.
Okay. Let me dive in. Yeah, that's always, because prototyping in startups, it's always time sensitive. You should be able. They want boards, yesterday. It's always pretty time sensitive. For Ionics, we've been successful actually to do prototyping in the Philippines. We have, it's a different supply chain game. Prototyping is a different supply chain game. You have to be able to find stock. You cannot order based on lead time. You have to have quick turn PCB suppliers. You have to have quick turn mechanical suppliers as well. You have to buy from stock. And it always based on very short lead times. We've been successful in the Philippines to support that. But also, on top of that, we also have our prototyping house in the US to support that. So it depends. We have options for the customers to do it in the US with our prototyping house. We also have options to do it in the Philippines. And it's this combination of options that really allows us to be flexible and to be able to support all the NPI and prototyping requirements of our customers. For our customers, for example, in Europe, they do prototyping with us in the Philippines. They have actually the confidence because they know us to be very technical and will be able to handle their documentation even if it's incomplete. Usually, the hesitance is because the companies don't have complete documentation to hand over. It's always changing every day. So the hesitance to do prototyping in a remote location is because of that, and they want it very close. But since we've already have a lot of experience, we also have our own design team. We also do our prototype, so we know what it is. We know what it takes to do prototyping remotely, and we're able to service customers.
Okay, very good. Thank you for fielding that question, Jay. Greatly appreciate it. We have a brief video here to show you, and then we will conclude this webinar.
Graham?
Yes, Celine, thank you.
Yes. I just wanted to add on to what Jay shared regarding the Philippines having the ecosystem to be able to nurture smaller companies who are still in the seed or series A or Series B funding, right? So they are looking for cost efficiencies without sacrificing quality. And we're happy to know that the Philippines has this ecosystem built already, given the experience shared by both Jay and Yusek Fita earlier in their intervention. So number one, we have the market, right? Philippines, 13th largest in terms of population, young demographic, 3.5 billion, access to 3.5 billion population with ASEAN and RCEP. And then having said that, you have the Philippines. The Philippines is seamlessly integrated in the regional value chain. So you have this, as described by Jay, they can cater to the technical requirements of a startup, and other aspects of the ecosystem that will be able to nurture them is that they can leverage on the synergies of the Philippine industries. So we have high-tech manufacturing from medical devices, telecoms, automotive, as described by Jay. We are number one in terms of voice and customer service for IT BPM. Second, in terms of non-voice from software development. So we recently launched the AI roadmap and the Innovation Act. So we have this ecosystem in place. We have other industries, like for example, plastics and minerals, and many more. So I think that can be a subject of another webinar. So just to download all this information to our stakeholders here in the US. But just to share that we have the ability to nurture startups.
I greatly appreciate that input, Celine. And when I was working in the Philippines, I encouraged my clients to take on startup requirements, because some of them can lead to some pretty good things. And you need to get set up. And I think, as Jay described, you have to have a setup to handle that. And it's going to be a little bit separate than your volume production capabilities and setups. So thanks again. And do we have a video, one last video to share?
Yes, sorry. I wasn't quick enough to show the video earlier. So here it is now. So this is another video by Onyx, just to show you again their factory floor.
Graham, I think you're on mute, Graham.
Thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. Celine, thank you for sharing that video. Very, very nice video there of Onyx. And I'd like to first say that I thank everybody on the panel and Jay for fielding those questions, some tough questions, and thank you for that. Going forward, we plan to share with all of our attendees the PowerPoint presentations and we shall send them via email to you based on the emails that you gave us during the registration process. If you have questions, please send them to us. We're anxious to hear from you. It would be greatly appreciated if you did that. You can also note down our contact details. There they are. And let's see. Okay, you can, sorry about that. You could please note the contact details. You can get in touch with us directly with Ionics, with Jay at Ionics, the Philippine Board of Investments, or our DTI representatives here in the US. We hope we've provided you with some valuable and solid information in regards to high-tech Philippines and Ionics EMS in particular. Before this Zoom meeting ends, we're asking the panelists to stay for a few more minutes for some picture taking. And thank you once again for your attendance today.